I don't, we're, I guess, we can announce this publicly now. We are disappointed that Ms. Johnson has tendered her resignation to the board. We thank her for her service here, and we'll, continue trucking along and, try to continue to get this work done on behalf of our community. So with that, we'll call the meeting to order. And Bill, did you want to say anything regarding the agendas?
The minutes.
Yep. Sorry. No, you're right. You're right.
All right.
So,
yeah. No, it's just that between me and Max, we had a miscommunication. But so now the last three sets of minutes have been up in our package for the last 4 or 5 days. And so that brings us up to date.
Okay, very well. So and you were right. So I did send out the agenda for everybody to review. Does anybody have any changes that they would like to make to the agenda before we approve it? All right, so I don't see any objections. So we would require a motion to approve.
I make a motion, Chairman, to approve the agendas as we have it.
Okay. Is there a second? Very well. Okay. Max, are you able to call the vote?
Sure. Let's see. Sorry. All right. Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Ms. Gilmore? Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
And Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Okay. So the agenda approved the agenda is passed as approved. The agenda is approved. So Mr. Mendez spoke about the minutes at this point. Are we in a position to adopt, Bill, or?
I believe so, unless anyone has any comments.
I do have some comments on the February 11th one, although the other two dates are seem to be factual. Just a couple of facts, I think, for the February 11th, in that there was, the matter of our nomination process and election process, and there was a statement that that was made that this would be revisited at our next meeting, March 11th. That was kind of omitted, and just from a factual standpoint, I'd like to see that addition made in there. And otherwise, I would make a motion to approve all three if there is okay with that additional fact.
I certainly have no problem.
Just for clarity's sake, you're saying the fact that the minutes, that the current agenda doesn't show the talk of the vote?
I'm not sure, whether it might be folded into maybe somewhere later down the agenda or not. I'm just really speaking to just the minutes right now. And, we had the facts were that there was, one vote for one position, and then there was another vote, and then there was some public comment, which created some conversation that circled back to perhaps, I think Mr. Watson, when I looked at the video today, Mr. Watson said something about a potential revote. That was a fact. I think Mr. Mendez had made a statement about resigning. That was a fact. And I think I myself, said that if voted, I would take a position, and that was a fact. And those are, not to belabor anything, but I just want to be factual and transparent so that our minutes do reflect the facts of the meeting.
I don't have any problem with that. And as far as I'm concerned, I can make those changes. And then as for the actual revisitation, we'll deal with that later.
Thank you.
So other than, so the two other, well, is there a motion to adopt the two meeting minutes that are fine, and to change the February 11th meetings to more accurately reflect?
So is that your motion, Nancy?
I'm sorry, Bill, I didn't hear that.
Is
Is
that your motion to accept the two and
Sure, if
then
you want me
to
to do a
accept
second
the,
Yeah, if you want me to do a second
make the
motion,
motion and we'll do it.
I'd already done one. I was going to step back and have that space for someone else. But I will make a motion. Do we still need that? We were talking over each other, so I kind of didn't hear.
So what I said was, is there a motion to adopt the meeting minutes that are in order and revisit the February 11th meeting minutes for the updates?
I'll you know how good I am with Robert's rules. I botched them up for 9 months, but yeah, I mean, we need to reflect the minutes accurately. So if what we're saying is, if we're going to approve the two that do appear to have accurate minutes, but yes, there's the one that reflect that sort of point where we talked about having a revote, and I would like to make the motion to make that happen.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Max, are you able to take the vote there?
Sure. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
I believe Ms. Gilmore is still absent. Mr. Mendez
Yes.
and Mr. Watson.
Yes.
Okay. So that passes. Now we are at the section for public comment. I believe Ms. Carpenter, you had wanted to have it at this point in time, assuming that, I mean, there's public attendees that would want to discuss or make comment. I don't see, Ms. Parks, are you able to pull the attendees?
I am. So far, there are 2 people that are raising your hand. If you would like to make a public comment at this time, make sure you hit the raise hand icon, or if you're on the phone, press *9. And how long do they have for public comment? 3 minutes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me set the timer. And the first person we have is Walt Heineke.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You are on with the Police Civilian Review Board.
Thank you very much. Members of the board, thank you for your service to this important endeavor. I am starting to get a little worried here. I think there have been 3 resignations since the board started, and I'd like to get to the bottom of this resignation. I think when you start to see 3 resignations, it's not just about personal problems or personal issues. There's something else going on. And I think we need to get to the bottom of why we've had 3 resignations since the board started. And what's going on there? My speculation is that the board and the council are not moving fast enough and assertively enough to redress the problems with the watered down bylaws that you all started with initially, and the revamping of the ordinance in line with what the state has now granted in terms of the expansion of authority for the board. Perhaps people are starting to lose confidence in the efficacy of the board going forward, and so they're bailing from the ship because they're not getting signals from you and council that we're going to move aggressively to revamp the ordinance, specifically to expand the powers and scope of powers that the state legislature has given us that will become active in June. So I think we need to get to the root of this issue of why people are bailing from the Civilian Review Board. So I'd like to hear publicly from the three folks that have resigned if there's anything that's tying their resignations together. And I'd like for someone to look into that. But thank you for your continued service right now.
All right, next up we have is Harold Foley. Harold, can you hear us?
Yes, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Hey, so good afternoon. Walt didn't mention it, but I'm part of the People's Coalition, and the People's Coalition been beside the PCRB since the first iteration. And I think the most important thing that we, the People's Coalition and the PCRB have in common is we want something that has teeth, that's going to be there for our grandchildren, and is going to be a system that can help people who have had problems with policing. I am really shocked, though, that Dorinda has left. You know, and I think Walt make a good point. What is going on, right? So, you know, I'm kind of like lost for words because, you know, we have some strong people who has left this board. And it's really concerning to community members. But I do want to bring something to your attention. I do want to make a comment about what's the status of your annual report. I don't know if y'all working on it or if it's going to come out soon, but this is a question to the chairperson, the vice chairperson, or whoever wants to answer it. But what is the status of your annual report? Thank you.
Sure, and I can
answer the annual report question.
go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, basically, I've been too busy working on the ordinance to make a lot of progress on it. Hopefully by this time next month, we will have it. I apologize to Mr. Foley and to everybody else who wants to see it.
Well, hold on. First, what I was going to reference was so section 2 4-63. I mean, section 2-463 of the ordinance actually provides until April 15th of the year for the annual report to be done. So we're not, you know, behind in that. I thought that's what you were going to say, but it's not currently due at this point, and we are working on it in a number of things. And this kind of ties in to what Mr. Heineke was saying earlier. The board is, you know, despite the resignations, the board is doing work on behalf of the community. And I think that'll be seen a bit later in the meeting with regard to our updates.
Yeah, actually, I think that I may be wrong, but I believe that the bylaws say December. So I may have been operating under a misapprehension, which is good.
So the next person we have that is raising their hand is Maisie Osteen. I hope I'm not butchering you guys' names. If I am, I apologize. Maisie, can you hear us?
Excellent job. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
You crushed it. Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you all for letting us speak tonight. First, I just want to thank you all for the work that you're doing, and just recognize that this is hard work, and I really appreciate what you all are pouring into it. And I think one of the things that is making it extra difficult is doing this without an executive director, which I know does not land on your shoulders. But as a community member, want to think about ways that we can support that effort. And I know that it's on the agenda to talk about the progress. So I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse here, but I think that maybe conversation with Chip Boyles, who obviously now he's in that position and that position's filled, about maybe relisting the job would be a great idea. And then we could help circulate that listing further if that's something that would be appreciated. But y'all's work is hard and we recognize that, and it's made even harder without that kind of staff position filled. So I would encourage any efforts that can be made to drive that hiring process. Thank you.
Hey, I got a comment. I don't think we've lost 3 people since we've actually been aboard. We lost Stewart jumped ship before the governor had even before the governor had even signed that legislation. I think he's a good friend of mine, but I think he lasted about 2 months. So we started last week in June, and I think he resigned in September. And this work is hard. I mean, we're talking about something that's been an issue for what, 400 years. So, it's not for everybody. This has been 2020 was an extremely stressful year. And then there's another layer. And, it's just not everybody's going to make it. I'm very definitely sad, particular that Rennie is no longer with us, because I think she gives us a lot of strength and intangible years of being part of Charlottesville and having relatives and sons that she's raising here. But I don't personally believe it's because of any of us. I think we're trying to do the best we can given the resources. Maisie explained, we haven't had an executive director. We just got a legal team about 3-4 weeks ago. So we've been in a pandemic. We're on Zoom meetings. We've never met each other. And, so it's not necessarily easy, but we are definitely trying to do the best we can with what we're working with, in my opinion. Thank you.
Chair Brown, if I might make a comment. I think it's very apropos that we have our meeting tonight, because it was 1 year ago today, I think, as Mr. Watson alluded to, that Governor Northam declared a state of emergency because the CDC had just declared the COVID-19 a global pandemic. And we were, I think, almost at the cusp from the original seating of this board to perhaps have our first meeting within a few weeks of that. And April, May, we couldn't. And I think that has slowed us, down to, in getting speed up. I think I agree with Mr. Watson. We haven't, met in person, and to establish that network, doing the best you can over Zoom, but it's such an impersonal platform that it's hard to do that as we move forward. But I think that there will be some significant movement, because we're all aware that we want to make a very strong ordinance with a very strong set of bylaws that reflect the hard work our legislators did, even our local legislators, in getting the laws passed that they did. And we need to make sure that we have teeth in it, that it is equitable in all respects, and that it does not create a large barrier for folks who are either victims of or witnesses to police actions that should be brought to light and should be investigated, and if necessary, accountability for those actions. Thank you.
At this time, no one else has raised their hand. If you guys want to continue.
Very well. Thank you, Ms. Parks. So now it's the status of the complaints. And I know that there's likely be some discussion here. So at this point, there have been 13 complaints that have been sent over or either reported to the CRB directly or sent from CPD. Those are the ones that have, to my understanding, been where the complainant has checked the box to have that shared. I know that there is talk of some discrepancy in reporting on the CPD's website, but those are the ones that we have, and all of those as of now have been closed. And at this point, I believe that Ms. Carpenter, I don't know if you have anything you want to say on that, or if there are any additional questions. I did invite the chief on specifically to speak about those discrepancies on the website versus what we're reporting, if there are questions along those lines. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I don't think it was necessarily, I wanted to make sure that we were getting, those that were being opted, chosen as opting into reporting to the PCRB that way directly to CPD, that we are getting the actual, the actual report, not just a spreadsheet of some and I think that I'm not sure if that's correct. And then I did have a question about the form itself, and I don't know if this is the point where to raise that question or not.
I mean, I think it's a good point, because again, I did invite the chief on for that, and I know that you had some questions there.
Yeah, the main question was, I think that when we were having discussion, and like I said, post discussion, forms are adopted and protocols are adopted. But I thought that our main discussion about the confusion of the original, of the prior complaint form before it was recently updated, was that it didn't allow for, you had to go down to the bottom of the form, and there was concern, what was being said about opting in to giving this information to the PCRB. And now and we thought that would be, a good idea just to have one box. And now there are a couple of boxes, and there's language about, this information, which is correct, that could possibly be made more public. And it does seem to, and like words matter, words matter, because they give us a response in ourselves about what these words mean to someone. And it could be seen as, I don't think the word is threatening, but I would say certainly could move into the realm of concern. And I didn't think that would be something that we should support, is language that could give a community member a concern about, hard enough to report the action, but certainly adding another layer of concern for personal space safety was something I was just had a question about. And it just, and to be made clearer to me. Thank you.
You. Actually, as a follow-up to your training with NACOL and with Ms. Carpenter's question, and thank you, Chair Bellamy Brown, for inviting me. NACOL asked you, what was the language? What were we saying to individuals? We'd say nothing to them. We give them the form, and they read the form. They're asked to fill out the form at their leisure in their own handwriting. We added the opting in as an option that doesn't exist and didn't exist even with the previous ordinance. That was something that we had did as a understanding that letting people know that there were other options that could be sent. So let's first talk about the discrepancies of what people are calling discrepancies. There are no discrepancies between what you have and what we have. Individuals have the option to send the reports that they want to the PCRB. Those reports that they say, yes, they want to send to the PCRB, we send the entire report over. I don't know who's the person who receives it. We send it typically to the chair or the chair's designee. Before, I think it was previously Mr. Watson and Mr. Mendez, and now it's Mr. Bellamy and Mr. Watson, I think. I'm not sure who he distributes them to. We've made that choice to send it to the chair because there is no pathway. in your bylaws or your ordinances by which you get that. So we send that. According to the ordinance, all complaints are sent to the executive director. That doesn't exist. So that's not your fault. That's not our fault. That just is a void that exists. But as a conduit to get information out long before any of the special sessions, I made the decision, if a person wanted to send it to the PCRB, why not give them that option to do just that? So Ms. Carpenter, that was a decision I made to allow people before there was any ordinances to let them know that it did exist and they did have another avenue built into as well. Any reports that come in directly to the PCRB, they are then sent to us. And then, so that's how you'll get your numbers. What came directly to PCRB or what came directly to CPD, and then we've now funneled them to you. Anything else, if a person says they don't want to send it to PCRB, or if it's an internal investigation that we start as an internal complaint, you'll see that on our website very clearly. We adopted, and I don't know if the email was shared when we sent the form back to you, the PCRB in February, saying to look at the form. We adopted the gold standard, which the inaugural PCRB had brought Fairfax in, if you remember, and that's the language. Where Fairfax and Virginia Beach are the only two agencies in the Commonwealth that have PCRBs or civilian review boards or civilian oversight or citizen review boards. We adopted their language as the gold standard, who the initial inaugural board brought here, and as supported by NACOL. Where we said is people should give the option to whether they want to do something or not. Much like your credit cards, you know, there are consumer protections that have said, hey, you don't get to just automatically, you can't automatically put people in that category and then force them to opt out. What we did is add two languages that were very clear, that says check here if you do want your complaint. That's the very first one. If you do want your complaint forwarded to the CRB, Police Civilian Review Board, and initial it, or check here if you do not. So they now have to take an affirmative action that says they actually saw this and that they read it and that they're informed. The language even about that we will forward all complaints to the department board's executive director, that's within 2 business days. That's the ordinance. We are informing people of that. That's not a whole lot of issue. And I would hope that the CRB would want us to make sure that people are informed so that we are in compliance. The information provided to the PCRB may be subjected to public inspection. You're a public board, public commission. That language also directly came from Fairfax, who is the standard. We've actually added more information so people could, you know, have as much information. We've not been able to capture before if someone was submitting on behalf of someone else. How do we capture a third-party complaint in which the subject has no idea someone is getting that information? It makes it a bit more difficult for us even to track back potential witnesses to an incident as well. So we've made the form a lot clearer, a lot cleaner, and it is online. However, we're still working with IT for 2 things to occur. That the forms that are online, IT does not give us the option to automatically submit a form to us. So IT is working with that. Part of what we've asked them that is, if you can want to do it online, because there are a lot of people who want to do things online and don't want to come into a police station or don't want to come into a space, how can they do that? But that it would automatically meet the ordinance standard that as soon as they hit submit, it goes to our internal affairs and the executive director of the PCRB, taking out any of the making sure that it's not there within 2 days. It's automated. Human error doesn't exist at that point in time any longer. It makes it a lot easier. I've also asked IT to do something else different for us. Just like you have a PCRB email I think that's just, I don't know if it's a generic one. I haven't done that. I just see your names connected to submit complaints. I've asked that we have a generic one that is when you hit the complaint form, that it doesn't go to a specific person. It goes much like the FOIA inbox or the council inbox, so that it doesn't have to be tied to the individual. Right now it's Lieutenant Gore, but if he ever leaves the position, that means changing all the forms again versus having an IA email box. So we're trying to make sure that people have as much information, as robust and as descriptive as they can, so that they can use every avenue to file when they've been aggrieved or feel they've been aggrieved by some interaction with the police department. So hopefully, Ms. Carpenter, that answers your question.
That is a very thorough answer, and I certainly appreciate it. Glad to see 21st century technology being used more and more. But I think that the one concern is that whether it's a complaint made to us that we funnel over to the CPD, or conversely, if someone comes into CPD or even online, that it just automatically goes to the PCRB. It just seems like that would be a way to create communication and better.
Yeah, I'm going to be really careful here. The ordinance says it goes to the executive director, right?
Right.
So it automatically will go to the executive director of the PCRB. That's what I said. It cannot directly go to the board members. There's just too many things that we have or we have not worked out in terms of systems and processes. One of them is, for example, Ms. Carpenter, let's say you file a complaint and you list witnesses in your complaint, and that witness has not given permission to share that information. There are a lot of personal informations. Now, what I think we could do, and what I've had discussions with my team on, you're trying to get information. Is there a way that once we get some systems in place, that there's a redaction process so that you are just seeing the full, robust complaint itself, the description and the narrative with all of the personal identifying information of the complainant who's submitting it at your disposal. So those are things we can work through. These are all IT solutions. Otherwise, they become a human person redacting and the rescanning. And I don't have a lot of resources and manpower, because the default will become me. And I'm so not interested in that as one of my labors of love. But, you know, like for instance, where that contact information is there a possibility that when that is submitted to a system, that it is automatically those kinds of things, if they have opted out to have their full complaint sent, but at least you can see the narratives. Now, I will take some exception, because there were some comments that said, oh, we get no information about the complaints that come out through Charlottesville Police Department. We are the only one in the nation that I have found, and I have been serving so far to date, that I have been able to find out that we post summaries of the complaints on the websites. So if you all haven't gone on the website, there is a summary of the complaint. If you go on anyone else's website, there is nothing of that sort. There is nothing that says on any other website of any police websites of the race and gender of the officer who's being complained against, or the race and gender of the complainant. The outcomes by specifics, like this is the outcomes, not something generic. And in 2021, I added a box called corrective action. All of that is actually posted on our website. And if you find another place who's doing that kind of thing and that kind of work, please contact me and we'll see what we can do even more. And these are all things that we're not mandated to do, but it is how do we make sure that when you say you need the data, that you're getting it. Now, oftentimes we'll get a second pushback. Well, how do we know that the data is true and that they're being authentic and it's accurate and transparent? What I say oftentimes is it's interesting when you get no data, no one, they're complaining not getting, and then all of a sudden when you get a bunch of data, that the pushback is, well, are they lying? I don't know how to answer that, except to say I've been putting data up since I've arrived here. And that was in June of 2018. You can go and see our complaints, our use of force reports are all up. They go up on the websites and they go up very quickly. And there is a lot of communication between myself and the previous chair and the current chair about systems and how we can do this better in a cooperative spirit so that the community is best served.
Very good. Thank you for your time this evening for that explanation. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and I would like to also thank you. And if I can comment, and I want to be very careful not to misattribute or to misunderstand. As I understand it, in the past, the CPD has held the results of investigations, the corrective actions, as you say, confidential. And I know it, again, hearsay. One person who specifically asked for that question on a complaint that they were involved with, and they were told, no, I'm sorry, that's confidential information and it's not legal for us to give it to you.
That is correct. So if you look, there are no personal identifying information on any of the complaints. So the complaints are only identified by numbers, right? So on the website, it says complaint number. It doesn't have an officer's name. It doesn't have an officer's personnel jacket. And if it says something like discipline, it doesn't say whether they were suspended or any of that information. However, you are correct. The person wanted to know very specifically what was the discipline that they received. Were they employed? Were they being decertified? Were very specific questions asking about a very specific officer's personnel jacket. The reason I can add corrective action is because I am not identifying the specific officer. It's the case and the actions. So that is different than if you said, hey, I want to know Chief Brackney's, the discipline specifically that occurred in this case for Chief Brackney. Now, in full transparency, if you can do some legwork on your own and figure out who that is, that's very different than me releasing any of that information. So that's how I'm able to add the corrective action aspect that we're taking. And again, I don't know any department who's doing that kind of transparent work about the cases. And again, if you look even at ours, I don't know any departments, if you look at the number of cases, that sustain the number of complaints that we sustain in the community. So knowing that the community is being heard. And the reason I thought, Mr. Mendez, it was important to add corrective action, because people think, well, okay, yes, what did happen? So yes, they were sustained, but if it fell on deaf ears and there was no consequence, there was no corrective action, there was nothing that went in place to mitigate or to attempt to moderate or ensure what might happen the next time around, then the community loses, faith in the system as well. It says, okay, we've got to a desired outcome only in terms of a finding, but not in terms of a corrective action, so that we understand that those behaviors are not and should not be tolerated in the community or by my officers or by myself.
Thank you.
Are there any additional comments for Chief Brackney tonight?
So Chair Bellamy, I do think, though, this is the moment. I'm sorry that we might have to, I at least want to correct the record. And if I can do it or Mr. Mendez can do it, I'm perfectly comfortable with either one. But there was a statement.
No, allow me. Yeah, no, I made a comment at our last training session that a certain newspaper had been given the results of an IA investigation. I apologize to Chief Brackney for saying that, and I should definitely know better than to believe a certain newspaper.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It didn't happen. I don't share our stuff at all. And I appreciate that we at least can have those tough conversations if we're to build trust and legitimacy with each other, because that's going to be important for the community to believe in us and the work that we're doing, that, it didn't happen. The complainant shared it, and they should. They have the right to share it.
Okay,
It's just not me. I'm not going to do it.
okay.
So I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Mendez.
And yes, Bill, thank you
Has
for that. And
anybody,
sorry. No, go
has
ahead.
anybody
Commissioner.
seen the University of Virginia Police Department website recently? I was looking, I've got two screens going on, so I was looking at it. I don't know if it would botch things up to kind of to show, share my screen, but I've been looking at theirs recently, and they've got a, what I think is a pretty user-friendly complaint submission portal, which I think is pretty new, because I know when we started, they didn't have much of anything on there. Can I share my screen? Would that mess the flow of things up? Try to do that.
I just gave you share screen capability.
Okay. All right, I'll do that real quick. I won't hijack us. I'm gonna hit the button, see what happens here. All right, my IT is moving a little bit on the slow side over here. Let's see. Option thing. Okay, now I get you guys see it where it says tell us how we're doing?
It's not there yet.
It's
Not
there.
yet.
You just see me, right?
No,
Don't see me?
it says you started screen sharing. There you go.
Okay. It popped up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, if we were in a non-Zoom meeting, this would probably be something we were just sitting around a table downtown in person. I would have kind of mentioned that I had been looking at for a couple of days. This looks pretty user-friendly. Yeah, it says, tell us how we're doing. You may not know who the officer's name is in that first column where it says name of police officer. Most people can probably provide a description, then the details of the interaction, your name, email, phone number. And, something like this with also the option of the PDF or the phone call or come in person or every other, possibility. Maybe a direction to migrate in. I know I showed some other ones before. This seems just nice and simple and maybe not as intimidating. So just wanted to show you guys that as an option of something that is in our area that's, I guess this might be sort of in a pilot phase, but maybe
Mr. Watson,
Yep.
I think that's kind of almost like, oh, like your customer service card. You just went to Target. Tell us how we're doing. Did we meet your needs? That's a very different than somebody who wants to make a complaint. I bet you if we look on there, the complaint, how do you file a formal complaint might look a little different. Right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't claim this to be the end all be all. The work, the text can be different, but
yeah,
I just like how it's one page and user friendly. But yeah, it wouldn't have to be exactly like this. But like a lot of people, if you're a younger person and you're out somewhere, which we've seen over time, and you see something happen, then technically you could get on your phone while it's fresh in your head and just fill this in instead of downloading a PDF and trying to work your way through that. Yeah,
I hear you. The first part of what I said is we're trying to work with our IT team to be online, right? That's a very different one. But I would not feel as comfortable with, oh, just tell us how you're doing, right? I think we can just do those kinds of things after every interaction, but we're talking about a complaint where someone is saying that, hey, positive or negative interactions. That's a very different one. Like, oh, we came there and then, we thought we got really good service, right? There's a kudos kind of things, or, I wish that the officer would have waved as they walked past. That's just kind of like, tell us how you're doing. I think we're talking about something that is a complaint, right? Or so that there's a person who believes that something has been wrong. I think there's more opportunities to put lots of user-friendly stuff on there. But I think when we're looking at something of this magnitude, if I was going to make a complaint, would I want to say, oh, tell us how you're doing? Would I find that as the space where I might want to do that? I don't know. I don't know, but I appreciate all the lens in which we can look at how someone's going to do. You know, I think the new complaint form that we have on the website is one that gives us the type of information we're going to need. You know, who are your other witnesses? You know, in that tell us how we're doing, putting in witnesses and other phone numbers and emails sometimes can get a little confusing, whereas you can say, hey, or you might not remember to do those things just because it's in the tell us how you're doing, so that things aren't being archived in a way that I think we can capture. But you know, I appreciate it. I will always look at other ways to do stuff differently. But we just put this one up, and I think I'm probably going to stick with this one. I'm just going to push back a little on you on that one, Mr. Watson, and say, I think I'm going to be okay with this form for a little bit, particularly since, you know, when I sent it to the PCRB back in February about what we were doing, you know, I didn't get any response back about it looking any differently. So waited to 30 days that we say we're going to do anything. And then, you know, we've posted this new one up. So let's give this one a try for a little bit. And if we find it's complicated and people are saying, hey, it is complicated, we'll revisit that. I'm not opposed to revisiting that.
Yeah, you know, again, I'm just showing you something that's happened in our community that, like I said, if this was December, I don't think they had anything on their website in terms of complaints. So, and again, you know, the wording could be different. It's just an example. That's all. Thank you.
All right, well, Chief Brackney, if you don't have any other comments, I think we thank you for your time and you know, kind of elaborating more on the CPD online details and the form itself.
Thank you, appreciate it. I'm now going to go over to budget and finish up that meeting. So be well, enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Take it easy.
You're welcome.
So now we have the update on the executive director process. I did speak with Mr. Boyles, and you know, he had shared with me that most, I guess he had only heard from one applicant out of the initial pool in the time that he'd been here, and given the age of the applications themselves, you know, he was concerned, but that was a red flag for him. Those are his words, and so. You know, he wanted to present the option of reopening the process itself, with the understanding that there would be, you know, a significantly quick turnaround. It wouldn't be, you know, be belabored. And also with that, there was talk that we could potentially see, you know, some of the current applicants to make that decision. But I haven't heard back on that at this point. And that's something that we can, I mean, we don't necessarily have to have, you know, a meeting, you know, for that. We can still get that information relatively soon, and, you know, decide which way we want to go. But that's the update on that process right now.
So he's going to repost the posting that we developed.
Well, with our permission. So the decision is being left up to us. But again, there was talk of the possibility of reviewing, you know, some of the current applicants before we make that decision. That's not something that we necessarily have to do if we feel, you know, that, you know, that 5 months or so, 4 or 5 months is a long time, and we want to go ahead and reopen it with that expectation that we'll have a relatively quick turnaround, then that's something that we can decide to do.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was
I
just-
guess the tone that I'm hearing at the bottom of this is that they didn't see any outstanding star candidates that they wanted to grab. But things would have gone faster had that been the case, maybe.
Well, again, he came on, just recently, and obviously he's been a city manager, county manager elsewhere, and just for his purposes, given the fact that the applicant pool had been so far away, 4 months or so, and some things have changed within that process. It was his that was just a red flag for him, and that was simply it. So there was it wasn't an evaluation of the actual pool itself. It was just the age of the applicants, the age of the pool of applicants itself.
It seems there's a lot to. Good.
I was going to
James?
say, if you speak with Chip Boyles, also make sure it's being added to the NACOL website, because you don't want to just put it, and maybe they were going to do that anyway, but you don't want to just put it on the Charlottesville, website. But it'll obviously get a lot more visitors, a lot more applications if it goes national. Hey, my kids are taking over. I'm getting mute.
I think we should reopen it, and I agree with James. Put it on NACOL and perhaps another platform. But I think that they're a little stale. What we have in the folder, it's a little stale, and start over with, because when we started this, we weren't sure. I don't think which way the legislature was going to go, and we now know, and that might help if we have input again into the interview process as to candidates who might be really good prospects. I mean, they can always.
One of the things. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say they can always resend, or they can always just, reactivate. I would imagine their information with the city manager, couldn't they?
Yeah, we also touched very briefly on this in the ordinance task group, and their thought was, if we reopened it, that we should definitely send it to not just NACOL, not just law enforcement, but to them, to the People's Coalition, to the to the community groups, because they didn't know what was happening. They didn't go on NACOL websites, but they might know somebody who's really good if we can send them the announcement. So I think that's a very good idea, and we certainly want to do that this time around.
Okay. So, Ms. Robertson, is this something that would require a vote as well?
To request that the applications be reopened?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I think it would be a good idea to document that you're making that request formally.
Okay. Is there a motion to reopen the executive director application?
I move to reopen the executive director application. We should that's the end of the motion. Just when they do that, we should also take a quick look at it, because we are now much farther along in knowing the kind of person we want. So we may want to adjust the job description.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Max, could you poll the board?
Yes. Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
and Mr. Watson.
Yes.
So that passes. So next on the agenda is update on the hearing procedures. So there's obviously some public comment that that our legal counsel was copied on, and they have that at this point. We are at a position where we are trying to, I guess, marry the changes of the current ordinance with what we expect to happen out of the new ordinance. And that's what they were tasked with. They have informed me that they will have a draft of those hearing procedures tomorrow. So those won't be voted on at this point. We'll get the draft tomorrow, and then we'll be able to review it from there, and potentially, well, I guess we would, put that on the website for public review, and potentially, vote on it at the next meeting at this point. Are there any questions there? You're on mute, Ms. Carpenter.
Yeah, I know. I should keep myself unmuted, but then I talk to myself and that wouldn't be lovely. Are we going to look at some of the suggestions that we received via email from the People's Coalition, in reference to language, or is that something we'll discuss when the draft is out and then we discuss that at the next meeting or the future meeting, whatever that is?
I mean, the draft, whether they will, have those in the draft, I don't, necessarily know. I can, inquire about that from them. I think, kind of our email discussion where everybody was on there is a good place for that. I think that everyone saw what my concerns were. So I think for, I don't know, for not for streamline, but for, efficiency's sake, I think that we're able to do it at that, particular time and kind of move forward from there. If that, suffices for what you're asking. Okay. Are there additional questions or concerns? Okay. I believe Mr. Mendez, you have an update on the ordinance and bylaws work group.
Yeah, well, it was very productive, but I'll go through it as quickly as I can. We had a meeting on last Thursday. Myself, Bellamy, Harold Foley, Katrina Turner, Gloria Beard, Sarah Burke, Maisie Osteen, and Janice Rediger. We got a lot done, and there was a lot of good community participation and input, so I was very happy about that. The first thing we talked about was the ordinance template that Assistant Attorney Robertson had put together. Which, by the way, is an extremely good start, and we were very, very happy to see that. So thank you, Lisa. It has in it much of the language from the 2020 Criminal Justice Reform Ordinance related to powers, including binding disciplinary authority. The ongoing issue, however, is that there's no, it does not prescribe procedures for implementing these powers. And so there's going to be I think we believe there's going to be a substantial amount of work to, for example, make it clear that we can start an independent investigation immediately if we vote to do so, if it's a serious allegation. The question arises whether our investigations are going to be in parallel with the internal affairs, or are we going to be doing an exclusive independent investigation? We also we'll need to work on review procedures. The existing language still requires a review request or a complainant permission. And we think that's a little bit, that may discourage us or make it hard for us to investigate, for example, patterns in complaints if we want to do that. The information access provision that is in there now is only in the context of hearings. And I think the group would prefer that there was a stronger statement of information access that would apply across independent investigations, complaint reviews, and not just about hearings. And finally, there's no auditor or monitor provision, which is sort of growing consensus among the group that we need to be able to have someone, possibly the executive director, who serves as an auditor to systematically review internal affairs complaints periodically. And so the idea is that, well, it is a moderately straightforward to revise the ordinance. We definitely need to start working on the procedures. And that's really going to be, where the rubber hits the road. The second major issue we talked about was analyzing disciplinary options. How would the board want to have influence or authority in disciplinary actions? Sarah Burke put together a very nice analysis for us. The idea was that we wanted to have an open process, a meaningful powers to influence outcome, but without putting excessive legal or due process complications or cost, for that matter, into the situation. I want to emphasize that we want to have the power, but we want it to be practical. Now, all the disciplinary actions, the actual disciplinary actions, are conducted internally with no input from the public. And as we have just discussed, disciplinary actions are maintained as confidential. So no one outside of the police department currently knows what has been going on in terms of patterns. So there's a consensus building around an independent investigative model with strong disciplinary recommendations. Unless we want to rewrite the Charlottesville City Code, the ultimate power to discipline someone is always going to reside with the chief of police, the city manager, the HR department, and the personnel appeals board through a grievance process. So if we went that way, that would require a large amount of work, not only on our own ordinance, but on a lot of other city rules, regulations, and ordinances, which we think would be a very great burden and would probably delay us a lot. And as one of our members pointed out, what we want to do is get a structure in place. And if we find it's not strong enough, we can always amend it. So again, like we discussed last time, there's a leaning toward the board making a public disciplinary recommendation on a case after an investigation or a review, and a requirement that the chief must provide written reasons for differing, for not implementing the board recommendation, and that the board or the complainant can appeal to the city manager. Now, there's a lot of legal maneuvering that needs to be done And we definitely need to get several opinions from our city attorney and possibly from our independent counsel before we pull this together. But we are making progress. I just wish, it's at this point quite complicated. It's by no means secret. Anyone in the audience who wants to hear more is welcome to come to our meetings or just to email me and I can fill you in. The next steps that we need to do are we want to provide the city attorney with a first round of edits and comments to the template, and hopefully finalize or come very close to finalizing a draft ordinance that we can vote on
Over here.
perhaps at our next meeting. Although I think we might take
Over
a
here.
little bit longer than that because it is pretty complicated. And then we also need to begin work on detailed procedures. At this point, we have not
Over here, Maggie.
we have not set a time for our next meeting, but we will keep you all posted when we do. Anybody have any questions?
James, Mr. Watson, do you have any questions?
I was thinking of something just down in the weeds. You know, we did that. The chief came on and talked about those complaints. And within that whole package of the ordinance, it's my understanding that we wanted to change something about the way it's written today in terms of that opt-in and opt-out. And because right now it says the person has the choice. I mean, we could change it right there if that's what we voted on. And that's my understanding. That a part of that entire huge package of powers that we're going for, we could even change that particular function, which is really the entry point with how we end up sort of helping the public in the event that there's a complaint. So what's there today, if the public is not necessarily happy with the current system, that's my understanding. One of the things we can change is, Bill even mentioned before, although I think it would take a lot of staffing, but I think in our last meeting, you had referenced some cities that the actual board takes in all complaints, which that would take a full-time staffer concentrating on it. But, I just want to reiterate that, we can, part of this ordinance, revision process that we're working on includes things such as changing the way complaint intake process exists today.
You're absolutely right, James, in that a large proportion, if not the majority, of oversight organizations are given the authority to accept all complaints. So it's not outlandish, and it's now not illegal in many states. Certainly, again, is something we might need a legal opinion on to assess the current legal climate in Virginia. But I think, that would be a one way to go if, the police IT department builds a user interface. We would certainly like to have parallel access to that user interface to the extent that it is legally possible. In other words, just have one, have one sign-up sheet to which we both have access.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I'm not a legal expert, but it seems like we could potentially change the ordinance again with that language, and then the only person that could stop it would be the city council, right? If they said, no, we like this, but we don't like this, right? But if they said, then regardless of what the chief wants or whoever the public wants, we could fight it for it, put it in there, and they got to live with it.
Well,
At least that's my understanding.
No, I think we should. I think we should. I think that's, quite frankly, you know, the sort of the consensus on effective oversight is that that board should have access to all complaints. And many boards do. And somehow they address the issue of witness confidentiality. If nothing else, we on the board could,
You know what?
we could take confidential, you know, we could sign confidentiality agreements. You know?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of, I guess, some of the processes that we were looking at in the draft. Well, the city attorney had mentioned, the acting city attorney had mentioned it before, early on in our inception, but also in the draft's standard operating procedures, there is a mechanism for where we would have to sign those confidentiality agreements and get those processes put in place. So that is something that's been percolating for a bit.
Thank you.
Are there any additional comments on the ordinance and bylaws work group report? Okay. Looks like it's new business at this point. Mr. Watson, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to share, and then I guess Ms. Carpenter, it looks like you have something as well.
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Okay. So my understanding is we're probably unlikely to spend all the funding that was allotted for the CRB this year. Not our fault though, because you know a chunk of that funding was supposed to be allocated to cover the salary and benefits of the executive director that, as we know, has still not gotten hired. And it sounds like we're going to put an advertisement out, right, to hire that person. So probably safe to say we could be looking at another 30 to 60 days. Fiscal year 2021, I believe, ends at the end of June. So my thought is if there's money still left on the table, what I think we should do and get the city council hopefully to agree on is create a scholarship program. Maybe we can take some of the unused funding for this fiscal year and create a few scholarships for local youth, primarily African-American youth or other minority youth who are from the city to go to Piedmont and attain the criminal justice certificate. I think that if we can eke out, you know, somewhere around $10,000, we could provide an opportunity for somebody growing up in Charlottesville. I know when I was a 20-year-old kid running around here, even though I had been in college for a little while and out of college, you know, somebody would have said, "Hey, here's some money. You can go." I think I just muted myself. I think this would be a way to reinvest back in the community and one of the many multitude of things that begins to bridge the gap between the community and the police. So again, instead of letting the money go unused, we should, and I've got more ideas on you know how it would work, but we should consider creating a scholarship again for local youth, particularly minority local youth. Thank you.
I think that's quite constructive. The question is, does the CPD have anything going on in that area, or does the Police Foundation have anything going on? This would be something that we could team with, and you know, build a relationship with. So that's my 2 cents.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I know that at least from the few conversations I've had, I think it's legally feasible. And again, it's reinvesting in our community. It's not just us on this Zoom meeting talking about stuff. It's like, tangible. Hey, here's a kid grew up in Charlottesville, working on a downtown mall. Business been closed for 8 months because of the pandemic. Here's an opportunity to not only go to Piedmont, but the long range vision in my head would be to go to the police academy and ultimately get a job right here, right where folks were growing up, and get benefits and everything else. So,
Ms.
there you
Robertson, sorry, Ms. Robertson, is that something that is even feasible for the board to do?
So I don't think that it is per se within your authority under the ordinance, but I do think that it's something that you could ask city council to do. You could make a very specific request that they either do it themselves or that they enact some sort of authority giving you permission to use the money that way. I think the easiest thing would be for city council themselves to set it up, but either of those ways would work, but it's not within the authority that's under the CRB's ordinance per se at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Carpenter, did you have something?
Yeah, something I want to bring up. I think it's something that would be important for the board to have this information. And I think it will also go towards helping to create a very strong community outreach program. Recently, the police department finished up an internal survey. It's either called the Cultural Climate Survey or Climate Survey. It's my basic understanding is that it is a temperature check on how all staff are feeling. And it was just wrapped up this past December. And I think it's a document I would like, if Mr. Price had been here, but maybe Ms. Parks can, Ms. Robinson also can pass this along, that I'd like to make a request as a PCRB board member to request that document be shared with us, so that if we're going to go out and, share the good word, so to speak, of the PCRB, I think it's incumbent that we understand what staff are feeling from the community, because we've had a lot of turmoil over the last 3 years. A lot of people have left their positions within the police department. We know that they've been very honest about their staffing issues and things like that. And I'd like to request a copy, hoping that it doesn't require a FOIA request. But if it is, I hope it's a no charge, because it's, a board member requesting this. But if not, we'll go the other route. Now, I don't know if there's anybody on this call, whether Ms. Robinson or Ms. Parks or Ms. Robertson, this acting city attorney, can address that.
So I think that, if that is a request that you all would like to make as a board, you should discuss that and then communicate that request as something coming from the board to the chief of police, and not just from one particular member. So you all should, discuss whether that's something you'd like to ask for. It is right now, and this is going to be why, as you go along, as Bill said, your operating procedures are going to be so important, because these issues of who can see what and how much information you can see is something that's got to be worked out between you guys and the police department. So the request should come from the board and be made to the chief. I can't really speak to how she will respond. Right now, that's police department information, and she will decide how to respond. But certainly it's a request the board can make.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for your input. I appreciate that. And so that's a discussion I want to have. If we want to create a permeable, transparent, fluid liaison process, I mean, we're kind of like the front line here. I think it's important that we understand, what the thoughts are from one part of this equation. And I think whether it goes to the executive director when they are hired is fine. But I think it's definitely some information that would be important to the work that we're doing, and would like to entertain, asking it as a board, or if we have to put it off till we get an executive director in 30 days or 45 days, 30 days would be best. That would be okay. But I think that if that information is out there, I think it would be very helpful to the work of this board, this structure that we're developing, to understand even more. I think it goes right along with ride-alongs. I think it goes right along with ride-alongs and things like that, we've gotten suggestions to do.
Do we have any idea of what the structure of this survey was? I mean, can we see the questions? Because if we could get that would kind of help, I think, to make help us decide whether this is something that we need to see or not.
Mm-hmm. You mean like a synopsis or something?
Well, presumably they have a survey form.
Okay.
And so if we could, I move that we request the survey form from the chief of police.
I would second that.
Mr. Watson, did you have any?
Oh no, I was just shaking my head in agreement. There was a time when we got started, when I would see a police officer, I'd ask him, "Hey, what's it like being a cop in Charlottesville?" Just trying to get a real, but I didn't tell them they didn't all know that I was part of the board. Just trying to, get a feel. Hey, what's good, what's working, I mean, that would be good. That would be very helpful. Yeah.
Well, since
Can I
we
ask
have,
something?
yes, Phil.
If this was an internal audit or an internal document, again, I remind you, we are a board, yes, appointed by council, yes. But oftentimes we're getting into areas that we definitely need to make sure we don't violate policies that exist, that are already in place through the city, through HR and so forth. You can always ask, but don't be surprised if you get a no for various reasons. And if the chief gives you a no, she will, more than less, she will give you valid reasons. And, again, the information may be helpful, but I would be very careful. And this is me, and I'm a non-voting member. That information could be helpful maybe to you four, but disseminating out into the public, I would think if the chief would want that to be done, then that would be her call. But I don't know, I'm not her and I'm not in her head, but I'm sure you're all aware of that. And I just wanted to say that. And hello, everyone.
Very well, thank you.
Hey, Phil.
No, thank you. You're right. It doesn't hurt to ask. And if there's a no, there will be a, very cogent reason as to why that would be a no. So nothing gained if we don't ask.
Miss Robinson, could you poll the board?
Yes. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
and Mr. Watson.
Yes.
Okay. And just for clarity's sake, that's a request for the client survey questions to determine whether or not we ask for the survey results. So I see, I mean, we've got about, I guess, 34 minutes left. I do see a hand in the audience. I know that it's not on the agenda at this point. Sorry, go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Mendez.
I do think it's sort of we're honor bound to consider Ms. Carpenter's request. And I think I interpreted it correctly as a request to at least comment on revisiting the election last time, and the gist of it was that if there was a great demand, that I did not value the assistant or the vice chair position so much that I wouldn't resign if that was the sense of the board, that was a good thing. In fact, if I'm going to be deeply involved in the ordinance and the procedures, this could be a good thing for me. And so if there were anyone on the board who expressed an interest in running for replacing me as vice chair, that would be no problem for me.
Okay. So at this point, I mean, I'd like to, is there an echo? Is that me? I'd like to go to Ms. Robertson for the process for rescinding.
May I
I'm sorry.
May I
Yes.
interject? I like to
Go ahead.
interject. Bill is irreplaceable no matter what he does on this board. I just want to say that right off the bat. He has been integral to a lot of things. In the last 30 days, I have to be honest that there are some parameters changing with my workload, and in an expansion, not in a decrease, unfortunately, but in an expansion of tasks and things that need to be done. So I would like to just say that I respect the process in our last meeting in February, and that I would like, I think we should know what that process is anyway, in case it should ever happen again at some point. But I would like to go ahead and just leave the status quo and move forward with this work while we anticipate getting an executive director, which sounds like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and some other things are coming to pass. So I hope that is agreeable with how many people here, the other 4 members of this board, and we move forward.
Yeah. Okay, Nancy. I'll get you next time.
I have no objections.
Hey, Bill, I just want to thank you for continually taking on the vice chair with the minutes. And if you need help, I'm sure we're all willing to help you. So
yeah, well,
definitely appreciate you.
I'll hand off part of the annual report to you, but
all right,
just fill in some blanks, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. In that case, Ms. Parks, we do have a substantial time. We'd like to, I know it's not additionally on the agenda, but we will take public comment.
Okay. So at this time, if you guys would like to make a public comment, go ahead and raise your hand. The first person we have up is Harold Foley.
How you doing again? So, James, I really appreciate your comment about helping people out. But James, it was a fight to get, the community had to fight to get that money for the PCRB. And my fear is if you say, hey, look, we don't want this money, they're not going to give you any more money. I think the PCRB has to be fully, it has to be fully funded to be successful. And, maybe PCRB members can advocate for some money somewhere else for the city to do that. But if you take from, my fear is you take and say, hey, we want to give 10,000 to someone, they're gonna say, well, maybe they don't need as much money as we think they need. So I just want to say that please be careful about that. Another thing too, I will hope that y'all will push the city council to fully seat y'all board again. It's just so unfortunate that things are happening or had happened to 3 folks. And Mr. Watson, the first person was Gwen Allen, who resigned. So I guess my hope is that you will push city council to make sure y'all board is full. And please don't tell the city council y'all want to give them $10,000 to do something.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that? Can I respond to that before the next question?
Hello?
Sorry, yes, I was on mute. Yes, Mr. Watson.
So my understanding, I don't know if Harold can still hear me, but it's not taking away money. It's money that's going to waste right now because we've already got a proposed allocation of funding for next year, is my understanding, which starts July 1. But all the money that was put in the bank for that executive director in the year that we're in now has not been used. We don't hire, even if we hire an executive director, there's only going to be 3 months out of the 12 that the person was supposed to get paid. So essentially, the money that was supposed to be used to fund that ED is going to go to waste if it's not spent on something for the fiscal year that we're in today. That's a little bit confusing. That's my understanding. And I think the first PCRB member quit before the board even had its first meeting, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
Lisa, do I basically have that right about the fiscal year, financial fiscal year, and how the funding works?
Yes, so the budget every year gives you a certain amount of money to spend between July 1st and the following June 30th. And it is correct that you will not likely spend what was allocated this year, but I don't have the proposed budget right in front of me, but I do know that when the proposed budget was presented, the budget office did say that the executive director position and money for independent legal counsel have been fully funded for the year beginning July 1st, or they're proposed to be fully funded. So at least in this year, it's not likely that if you asked council to apply that money to something else, it's not likely that would affect your budget for next year. Although it is correct that generally over a course of years, if you demonstrate you don't need all the money that they give you, you do run the risk of being reduced in funding. But since you guys weren't fully funded to start with, I don't think that's a danger for the upcoming year.
Lisa, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so just correct me with how this was set up. Any money is not used, does that roll forward, or is that taking away and then we start all over with whatever is established for July 1st?
So the budget's not like a checking account. The budget's just a document that says how much money you're allowed to spend during the year. So okay. Every year you get a new budget document. So it's not really like a checkbook. It can be sort of confusing, but there are some entities like the school board that talk about their quote carryover funds, but really all that really means is that it's like a bonus if they don't spend if they demonstrate that they're fiscally responsible and they don't spend everything, they get that much more the following year on top of what was funded the previous year. So there are certain entities that use that term carryover funds, but it's kind of a misnomer because the budget document isn't really, it's not a pot of money itself. It's just a plan for how much money you're allowed to spend during the year.
Right. Well, that was my question because, as you know, I'm a cost center manager. So yes, in my cost center, I'm allotted, and if I don't spend it or what have you, I start over the next budget year. But I do know that there are entities within the city that, if it's not spent, it goes to the, you have it there to fall back on. And that was my question. Was the police review board set up like that, or was it just set up like a normal cost center within the city?
It's a normal cost center. And like I say, it can get confusing because school boards often talk about their carryover funds. And then every year in December, after the audit is done every year and after the city verifies whether or not, how the audit came out, they sometimes do mid-year spending appropriations, and that comes from money that was verified as having been saved in the previous fiscal year. So it can get confusing, but the general rule is it's a cost center that applies for a year at a time.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so last thing. So my thought was if City of Charlottesville didn't hire an executive director by now, and all that money is going to go to waste, and why don't we use it for something like giving kids an opportunity to get an education? Otherwise, it's going to go to waste.
Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of
thought-
people that need their rents paid and their utilities paid still because of the
Let's put
effects
it
of
towards, let's put
I
it
was
towards
just-
that.
And I think that's what I was going to bring up. So when you're saying towards education, I think with regard to our board itself, it has to be a strict parameter. You had mentioned basically the criminal justice track, which is what we're in. But I don't think the intent overall is that, oh, here's some extra money, let's just put it to different spaces. I think we have a pretty narrow mandate or whatever charge, so to speak. And I think we might be getting into some muddy waters where we just say, let's just do it to whatever. I think the criminal justice part would be fine, but to say, let's just fund, some other educational aspect, I think we might run into just some trouble with that.
All right, next up we have Don Gathers. Don, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the work that you all are doing. I'm going to echo the sentiments of both Mr. Foley and Ms. Carpenter, and say that while I think Mr. Watson, it's a noble gesture, with the current climate, I don't think that we need to be in essence subjecting our youth to police work. And what you're suggesting also would be actually supplementing the police budget, who have already for the next fiscal year asked for an additional $1 million over what they currently got for this year. So I would really, as Ms. Carpenter said, rather see those monies spent towards helping people with rents, helping people avoid evictions. Even doing what the Blue Ribbon Commission suggested years ago and pushing council to go ahead and actually pay boards and commissions that they impanel, pay the individuals some sort of stipend for actually doing the work. I'll still go back to a statement that I made some time ago. If we can pay tens of thousands of dollars to outside consultants to come in and tell us what our problems are in the city, if we've got people in the city trying to solve those problems, then they certainly should be paid something as well. So I would much rather see some of those funds earmarked towards, and it doesn't all 10,000 doesn't have to go to CRB. If it is, I have no problem with it. Give it up any way that that would be appropriate for all of the members, including those that need to be seated for all of those slots. But I just don't think that in this day and time, in this current climate, both here locally and nationally, and really globally, that it's necessarily a good idea to induce that sort of thing on our youth. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have what? Heineke? Am I saying this right? I hope so.
You got it right.
Yay!
Way to go. It's kind of like Heineken beer, but without the N.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak again. On the excess funding that you might have, I have a couple of ideas of if you have a significant amount left for this year about how you might use it for you to consider. One would be to hire a temporary auditor to see how that position actually works out to your benefit before going to council and asking them to fully fund one in the next budget cycle. Let's see how that auditor position would help the board and the executive director. That's one way you could spend some excess funding right now. Another way that I think you could spend, if you have excess funding for the year, another way you could think about spending that money is to do a massive community public education campaign where you hire some young people of color and train them on what the new regulations are going to be in terms of the increased powers of the board that you're about to put into place in the ordinance, and send them out into the community for a couple of months to really educate affected communities about how this is going to be accessible to them. There's another way you could actually spend some of that funds and actually also be paying young people in the community that need some job experience doing outreach, could be funded during the summer. And then let me just lastly say, I want to caution you when thinking about what goes into the ordinance and what goes into the operating procedures. Because in my experience in Charlottesville, if things are not spelled out clearly in an ordinance, like the Human Rights Commission ordinance, they don't happen. They don't happen over time. When things are in the ordinance, they tend to be taken seriously. So I just want to caution you to think really carefully and in a considered way about what you end up putting in the ordinance versus what you put in operating procedures. So I appreciate your time and your effort on this really important issue, and thank you very much.
And everyone, would you mind, Chair, if I address Mr. Heineke's last point? I think Mr. Heineke has a very good point with that last point, but I will also note that the range of authority that has been granted under state law to you is substantial, and to have all your procedures in a formal ordinance would make the ordinance unwieldy. So I just want everybody to note that unlike the Human Rights Commission or most other sort of advisory or other bodies, the state legislation now says that city council has to approve those operating procedures. The governing body has to approve them. So I do think you do need to give careful thought to what goes in the ordinance and what goes in the procedures, but both have to be approved by city council. So even your operating procedures are going to have a formality to them, or they're going to carry the stamp of approval by city council. And once city council says how things are supposed to work, the human resources department, the police department, everybody's going to have to comply with those operating procedures as well as the ordinance, but it is a careful balance, and the ordinance is the enabling document. So it is really important to get the ordinance right and to have enough details in that, and to leave the operating procedures more to say how you're going to do those things rather than to, spell out precisely what you're going to do. Those things should be in the ordinance. I agree.
Great, thank you for that, Ms. Robertson. So I believe that does conclude the public comment. We have provided for 3 minutes per speaker. Our next, so we're at upcoming training events. So we have March 25th will be our next NACOL training at 6 p.m. And Mr. Watson, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We also have April 29th and May 6th will also be subsequent NACOL trainings. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
Okay. Miss, do we have, I believe we do. So Ms. Robinson, yeah, Ms. Robinson, if you can poll.
Yes. Ms. Carpenter?
Okay.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
And Mr. Watson?
Yes, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Meeting adjourned.
Well, good evening.
Bye.